Broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wills.
Hello and welcome to this special Sunday edition of WilmsFront on this 7th of February 2021. We are live on the WilmsFront YouTube and DLive channels and also on the YouTube Enhanced Entropy software. It is currently 8:30 p.m. here in Melbourne. As you recall, during the Wednesday night edition of WilmsFront, news broke that a Melbourne hotel quarantine support worker had tested positive to the coronavirus and had also spent several days out in the southeast of Melbourne while infectious before their positive PCR test came back. At that time, I was interviewing Perth resident Tanya Stapleton, who at that time was living through that city's 5-day lockdown that had been triggered by an infected hotel quarantine security guard with the so-called UK super strain who had spent time in the Perth community. The people of Perth, the Peel region and WA's southwest were released from their 5-day house arrest at 6 p.m. Friday Perth time. But the people of the Perth and Peel region have to spend another week with masks everywhere, including outside, because their Premier Mark McGowan thinks that it could be still lurking there somewhere. And he has arrested more people for not wearing masks as well. So the WA police state, it's way further than the police state we had during the Dan Andrews 112-day lockdown. Now, since the city of Perth had been shut down for 5 days because of an escape of this super strain from hotel quarantine, and if you add the Brisbane City 3-day lockdown in the middle of January, triggered also by an infected hotel quarantine worker, a cleaner, who also had the super strain. The recent trend had been that if the super strain had escaped into a major city, it would lead to a snap lockdown. After WilmsFront had ended, it was announced that Dan Andrews would be holding a late-night press conference at 10:30 p.m, or as Beverly O'Connor on the ABC announced,
has tested positive to COVID-19. Will be crossing to a press conference with Dan Andrews soon. A massive bushfire burning north.
Yes, easy to get the two confused, given the amount of alcohol that the lockdown stress had caused many people to consume. When I was interviewing Tanya, she talked about how Dan Murphy was one of the biggest helpers getting her through the the lockdown. The ABC didn't cross to Dan Murphy announcing the latest cases that they'd had of Corona beer. Now, Dan Andrews, this was the latest in the evening he had ever held a press conference, but as he walked up to the podium, he was wide awake.
To go. Yep.
Everyone was wondering what the hell was with his eyeballs that night. Was he on some pick-me-ups, or maybe he'd just taken the vaccine and was having a immediate reaction there? Now, thankfully, and to Dan's credit, he did not lock the city down because of that one case. All he announced that evening was that Victoria would be going back to what he called was the Black Rock outbreak rules at the beginning of the year. You'll recall that when the Sydney virus travelled south, so on New Year's Eve, home visits allowed per day, the number of people was reduced from 30 to 15. Masks are back in all indoor public spaces again, which is a pain, and a pause on the rise of office workers set to return. That was due to start tomorrow. It's currently 50%. It was due to go to 75% tomorrow. It is currently staying at 50%. Now, the fact that this hotel quarantine support worker was working in a hotel where Australian Open players and staff were staying, that threw into some doubt whether the Australian Open would start tomorrow. But it was confirmed the next day when it was also announced that there was no new locally acquired cases, that it would proceed tomorrow as scheduled. There is one change, is that when the roofs are closed at Melbourne Park arenas, that the people in the crowd have to wear masks. This is partly the reason why I'd never go to a public event like a sporting event during this time of a state of emergency, because you could be forced to wear a mask for hours on end. And then, of course, you've got to have all your contact tracing details stored as well. And, I've expressed my feelings on the collection of our personal information for contact tracing purposes many times before. Now, genomic testing that was announced on the Friday morning, when it was another day zero, confirmed that the quarantine support worker had the UK super strain as well. And so far, including today, he's infected no one in the community. So the Perth security guard has still not infected anyone else in the Perth city, and the Brisbane cleaner only infected her partner. So for a super strain that is supposedly 70% more infectious or transmissible than the original COVID-19, it hasn't spread into any of our major cities at all when it's escaped hotel quarantine. Now, given that we've had a hotel quarantine breach in each mainland capital city over the past 3 months, leading to the reintroduction of restrictions, lockdowns, and border closures. There is even a greater push for Australia to introduce remote quarantine camps for return travellers to Australia. Everyone was expecting some sort of showdown on the matter at the National Cabinet meeting on Friday, with the Morrison government consistently resisting the push to open quarantine camps. But at the end of the meeting, there was no National Cabinet agreement or proposals that eventuated from that with regard to quarantine camps. But there was an agreement by all states and territories to increase their hotel quarantine camps on returning travellers to Australia, since there was a reduction and pause at the beginning of the year because of the new super strain. And Scott Morrison shared afterwards a bit more details about how the various coronavirus vaccines will be rolled out across Australia next month. Now, turning to our featured topic and interview for tonight's Sunday special, which due to scheduling was pre-recorded Saturday afternoon. So unfortunately, you won't be able to ask a question or send a super chat to my guests, but I'll be in the live chat tonight, interacting with you all while I'm playing the interview to answer any questions you may have during that time. It goes for an hour and 15 minutes, and then I'll be back live at the end of it to wrap up the show and outline for you the Unshackled Productions lineup for the week.
This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net.
Since the coronavirus hit Western nations in March 2020, we've seen a giant swing all over the West to big government to such a degree that we are forced to live our daily lives at the behest of what the government and their bureaucrats say, and that can, of course, change on a daily basis. In Australia and New Zealand, we've seen centre-left governments re-elected with voters re-endorsing their COVID lockdowns, restrictions and border closures. Donald Trump, who wanted to keep the US free and open during the pandemic, lost the 2020 presidential election to Joe Biden, whom his Democrat Party and state governors have been the leaders over there in lockdowns, mask mandates and restrictions. So in 2021, how do we make the West great again? Initiate a return to private enterprise, small government, and individual liberty and freedoms. One way is to make sure the major centre-right parties across the Western world, including here in Australia, don't simply become big government light. How can that be achieved? Well, my guest today has offered a path forward. John Ruddick has been, for many years, a vocal advocate of internal Liberal Party democratic reform so that party members and even supporters should be able to directly vote on who the party's candidates for election are, as well as who the state and federal leaders of the party are. He argues that this leads to more skilled and principled party candidates and representatives. His advocacy has caused much disquiet over the years amongst the current New South Wales party power brokers and hacks. His arguments in favour and proposals for Liberal Party democratisation are contained in his 2018 book, Make the Liberal Party Great Again. John is a regular panellist on Sky News programs, including Outsiders, and his written commentary has appeared in The Spectator Australia. John, welcome to WilmsFront.
Good afternoon, Tim. Thanks very much for having me. Thank you for that introduction.
Now, my first question is going to be a general question. How are you feeling about 2021 so far? We're in February now. We've had the two circuit breaker lockdowns in Brisbane and Perth. Thankfully, in my city of Melbourne, we didn't follow suit. Dan Andrews has kept his promise to keep Victorians safe and open, and we've obviously got the vaccine rollout coming soon. What's your sort of vibe about, is 2021 going to be better than 2020, or are we just in a groundhog year, as I call it?
Yeah, look, 2021 is going to be 2020, the sequel. And often with sequels, they try to make it, bigger and more dramatic. No, it's just it looks like it's going to be these people, COVID mania, rightly or wrongly in my view, has proven, Tim, to be political gold. Jacinda Ardern was very good for her. Queensland, we're going to see it in Western Australia, which I suspect I'm pretty sure we're going to see an all-time record in terms of a lopsided vote. And we saw, Donald Trump was obviously politically damaged by COVID in the United States. So it's helping the left. I believe what it's doing is it's fast forwarding what they wanted to do in, sort of 10 years time, which is, ban conservatives from social media and, just really ramping up the cancel culture. So it's a bit like global warming. The facts now of the virus, of this once in a quarter century bad flu, the facts have now become quite irrelevant. It's disconnected from the real world. It's just become its own thing, and it's not a good thing.
Now, going to the contents of your book, which is Make the Liberal Party Great Again, I'm going to put forward to you a devil's advocate position. Right. Isn't the Liberal Party, particularly the New South Wales Liberal Party, already great again? I mean, the party is in its third term of government at state level. Gladys Berejiklian, she's being given or talked about as being the gold standard when it comes to managing the virus and not shutting down. And they've also, the New South Wales Liberal Party, provided 4 of the last Liberal Prime Ministers, and the party has governed federally 19 of the past 25 years.
Okay, well, the good question. And since Federation, the non-Labor side of politics has won about 3 and 4 elections. So it's always been lopsided in this country, and that's because the stupid Labor Party continues to be connected to the unions. But, well, look, on the Gladys situation, yes, she is the gold standard for Australia, but she still gets a 3 out of 10 in my book. I mean, the gold standard is Sweden, okay? And what has happened, you're right, that the New South Wales Liberal Party has had the 4 most recent Liberal Prime Ministers. It even goes back really. Andrew Peacock and Alexander Downer, very briefly, were the only non-New South Wales leaders we've had, for most of my lifetime. Now, in the first half of the Liberal Party's existence, Victoria dominated the leadership of the Federal Liberal Party. Robert Menzies, Harold Holt, John Gorton, and Billy Snedden, not Prime Minister but opposition leader, then Fraser, of course, and then Peacock. So what has and New South Wales in all that period had 1 leader, Billy McMahon, who was only there for a year or so, 2 years. So why has the New South Wales Liberal Party in the last 30 years, 40 years, completely dominated the party room in Canberra? Well, it's not that they're producing better people, I can assure you of that, because we should be having parliamentary leaders from Perth and Queensland and Tasmania, everywhere. So there's something going on. Why is New South Wales dominating? Well, it's because the New South Wales Liberal Party, the factional conflict within the New South Wales Liberal Party has always been far more intense. When Robert Menzies addressed the first state council of the Liberal Party in 1945 at the Sydney Town Hall, he said, as I've travelled around the country in setting up this new party, there's been internal divisions in some of these divisions. Some of them are warlike, some of them are quite peaceful. But he said nothing compares to New South Wales. That was in 1945. So because of the intensity of it, and you can only win if you are like a warrior, not an ideological warrior, a factional warrior, a thug warrior. And this is why when it comes to the apex of the factional war is the party room ballot for parliamentary leader. So who's good at manipulating these things? People who've been manipulating ballots in the New South Wales Liberal Party since they were young Liberals. That's why we dominate. Has it been a great government? Okay, well, look, the first 2 terms of John Howard's government were terrific, okay? But then we decided to throw out endless middle-class welfare. But despite that, at the end of John Howard's term, the federal government had $20 billion worth of debt. It cranks up to about $220 billion thanks to Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. Tony Abbott comes in and, he tried in his first budget and the party room struck him down basically because of that good budget. And then the Liberals pre-COVID mania got the debt up to about $550 billion. And now who knows where the hell it is? Well over $1 trillion, I hear. This is under a Liberal government. I remember at the beginning of COVID mania, Mike Carlton, radical left-wing nutter, sent out a long thread and he said, what have we got to complain about on the left about Morrison? And he was dead right. When I go onto Twitter or social media and I see lefties getting their knickers in a knot about Scott Morrison, I'm thinking, what the hell have you guys got to complain about? So, yes, politically they've been good, but I believe that it's been extremely disappointing. So this is why we need a new mechanism to elect the leader.
Now, to a degree, each state Liberal Party decides pre-selections and lower and upper house seats differently. New South Wales, your state, operates what's termed a delegate system, which is a form of indirect democracy, though you explain in your book why that system is so easily for power brokers, hacks and branch stackers to take advantage of and disenfranchise grassroots members.
Well, look, it was very archaic, the New South Wales Liberal Party. But look, after a 10-year battle, we have brought about some significant reform. So what had happened up until basically now is that to become a candidate for a state or federal seat, you just had to get on the right side of the dominant faction, the dominant local faction and the dominant faction at head office. Well, now, after a long battle, we now have had a first and significant step towards democratic reform. So if you want to be a Liberal candidate in New South Wales in the future, you're going to have to be elected by all the local Liberal Party members that live in that seat. Now, that's going to expand how many people have a vote, hopefully by a factor of about 10. And it's also going to mean that a lot of more sort of people who aren't caught up in the factional war and therefore will vote on merit will be having a say on these important decisions. So that system has only just this upcoming round of pre-selections will be the first where we're going to have what we call a plebiscite, where everybody gets to vote. Now, this is not going to bring instant reform, instant improvement in our policies and the calibre of our parliamentarians, but it's going over time. I believe that it will certainly improve things. Now, eventually, I want to have primaries to elect our candidates for parliament, which is what they do in the United States, because that is the most sort of pure democratic system. And that's how we're going to get really outstanding people, not just party hacks, running for parliament.
And for the upper house and Senate pre-selections, how are they decided under the modest reforms now?
Well, in the past, if you wanted to be a New South Wales senator, there was only 120 people got to vote, and those 120 people were basically all the factional hotshots, who were most of the time very sort of weird people. Now what's going to happen is we had proposed, and the membership had voted in favour of it, but it got changed. But the membership had voted that all members will get to vote for our Senate and our upper house candidates. That got watered down. So now, rather than 120 people voting, about 800 people will vote. But those 800 people are not as intensely factional as the 120, but not too far off it. So it'll still be a factional stitch-up.
Because one of the ongoing sagas with the Liberal New South Wales Senate pre-selection was the constant placing of Senator Jim Molan in the unwinnable position. He got placed in one unwinnable position at the 2016 federal election, managed to flunk his way into the Senate with both Fiona Nash and Holly Hughes, who is now a senator, being declared ineligible. Then in 2019 federal election, he was put in an unwinnable position, but managed to be able to fill Arthur Zinedina's casual vacancy by being elected by the members to fill that vacancy.
Well, Jim Molan is an outstanding Australian, and I remember first seeing Jim Molan when Julie Gillard was the Prime Minister, and we had a massive problem on our northern border with boat arrivals, and I just saw this guy, this retired military guy, get on there, and I remember thinking to myself, gee, this guy's impressive. And then about 2 years later, I see a report in the Australian, and it says that he's thinking about running for the Senate in New South Wales for the Liberal Party. I thought, well, that's interesting. I like this guy. And then I just happened to be at a function a couple of days later, and I bump into Jim Molan, and I introduced myself. I said, Jim, I'm a huge fan. And I said, and I understand you want to run for the Senate. Now, the first thing I want to say about Jim Molan, Tim, is this. Look, I wouldn't say we're best of mates, but we know each other reasonably well through political circles in the last 10 years. And I can tell you, Jim Molan is a top bloke. He's just a really, really nice guy. He's sort of like your favourite uncle. And he's got the most impressive handshake you've ever had in your life. Okay, his hand has been firing bullets and guns and rifles and doing things. He's got calluses on his hands, and he's a lovely bloke. So we had a very nice chat with him, and I said to him, Jim, let me tell you straight, as a supporter, you've got zero chance of being a senator because you're not the factional power brokers aren't going to back you. He said, "You sure about that?" I said, "Yeah, I'm dead sure." And then I said, "Well, what we're going to do?" I said, "But Jim, if all the members of the party in New South Wales could get a vote, you'd come first. So you should help us in this campaign to bring about democratic reform." And I sent him through an email about the democratic reform agenda, and he responded. He said, "It's very interesting. I'll have a look." Then I never heard from him until he lost his pre-selection. And then he came last, but behind some very unimpressive people. And, and you know, the media was outraged. This was in 2016. So then Jim says, "Okay, yeah, well, let's get behind this democratic reform thing." And so he then became like the Moses-like figure of the Democratic War. He became sort of like the hero of the membership. And he was, you know, a great flag bearer because he was not somebody with a history in the factional war, but he was somebody with an extremely impressive military background and who had stopped the boats. I know Scott Morrison likes to claim he stopped the boats, but really, you know, Tony Abbott, through his skills, picked the right man and he stopped the boats. And remember how much of an intractable problem it was. You know, and the Labor Party said it can't be fixed. Jim Mullen fixed it in about 2 weeks. No more boat people. Thank you very much. So he should have been on the red carpet into the Senate. We should have said, "Jim, be in the Senate until you die. Be there till you're 100." And so then Jim really led the campaign to bring about these reforms. And then even after that, and he got into the Senate through a vacancy, through the High Court, the citizenship thing. They're just two fluke situations where he got into two people got knocked out above him, so he was in. So he's a sitting senator, and then they bumped him off again. So then he ran as a rebel senator, and because he was so popular with the public and with the conservative press and the wider press, like in many ways, you know, he got about 100 and look, I've forgotten the number now, but I think it was about 150,000 votes, which was a hell of a lot more than anyone else expected.
Below the line.
Below the line. And I suspect that his actual vote was double that because, you know what, a lot of people that would have wanted to vote Jim Mullen would have been elderly people, and it's hard to vote below the line and still make your vote valid. It's easy to stuff it up is what I'm trying to say. So I bet a lot of other people wanted to vote for Jim Mullen. So after the powers that be could just say, "Oh my God, we've got this guy here who has, unlike any of the other politicians in Canberra, this is a guy who's got genuine grassroots, widespread, serious support." And so they just thought, we better get him inside the tent. And then they tapped Arthur on the scene, useless old Arthur. And they said, you know, just shows you how important they really treat the American alliance when they go and put an idiot like Arthur over there. You know, they said, "Arthur, retire so we can get Jim into the Senate to shut him up." That's what happened.
Now, you advocate in your book for lower house seats, both party members and supporters get a say, and for the upper house, all members get to vote, and also for the parliamentary leader as well, which we've seen the introduction of this on the Labor side with what they call the Rudd reforms at the federal level, where the party room gets half a vote and so do the members. Though the first time Labor did this, the members voted for Elbow, but there was a stitch up in the party room to have Bill Shorten as the leader, and look how that ended up. And the New South Wales Labor Party, they recently had their leadership election with Jodie Mackay beating Chris Minns. So what you're proposing is obviously not radical in that regard, especially when you look at the US as the ultimate primary system where the registered supporters, they vote on everything. But the argument against always is that it leads to extreme candidates getting pre-selected.
Well, look, what's happened with the Labor Party, and I was very happy the day that Rudd brought in that reform. The key part of having a leadership debate, a leadership contest, excuse me, is a vigorous policy debate. So this is what happens when the Republican Party had its choosing its candidate in 2016. You had, close to 20 candidates up there, and they're all slugging it out over policy. Now, when the Labor Party, after they lost in 2013, had their leadership ballot between Albo and Shorten, it was so boring. Okay, it was just like two sort of gentlemen, and there was no arguments about anything. I think there might have been one televised debate on Sky, and there was just no energy. Well, that's not how to do a leadership debate. Now, the best argument in favour of a leadership debate, the leadership electing the members, is that the original Westminster Parliament, Britain, introduced these reforms in the 1990s, and that delivered Tony Blair, who was, now let's put aside the fact that we don't like Tony Blair, he is the most successful Labor Prime Minister in their history, and he won 3 big election victories, and he did shift Labor significantly to the right, particularly on economic issues. So, he was good for Labor. Better than, they used to have people like Michael Foot in there, complete, pro-Soviet Union type people. Jeremy Corbyn. Which I will get to. Now, what happened was that the Tories introduced these reforms, and they had a leadership ballot, a very spirited leadership ballot, and it happened in 2001. And when I asked most people in Australia who follow politics pretty closely, none of them know about it. Now, why is that? Because on the day the results came out was 9/11. And so obviously 9/11 just sort of blacked out all other news. But the Tory party, at the time when John Howard was the Prime Minister, had a very vigorous debate for their leader, and Ian Duncan Smith won. Now, but let's talk about after Brexit. We have this magnificent result with Brexit in mid-2016, and David Cameron, who was pretty useless, very honourably immediately resigned. And I thought, good on him, because, he did campaign for Britain to stay in the Union, in the EU. It didn't happen. It's not like you can continue to be the leader of the country when you've just been completely, opposed to what it's chosen. And most politicians in that situation would have said, they would have come up with some, formula of words saying, oh, well, yes, I did campaign against it, but now I'm in favour. Okay. But David Cameron, the morning after, I remember watching it live. I had a feeling he might resign.
Yeah, so did I.
Yeah, and I thought, good on him. And so then what they should have had a leadership ballot amongst the membership, but they didn't. The stupid party room put up Theresa May, uncontested. And the stupid rules in the Tory party say that if it's uncontested, then we don't need to consult the membership. Well, I believe very strongly if there's only one candidate, and I would like to see half a dozen candidates for every leadership contest, but if there's only one leadership contest, if the party room can only produce one leader, I want that one leader to go to the membership and to get 50% endorsement. Thank you very much. Just so the party room can't completely, Now, what would have happened in 2016 when Theresa May was elected by the party room, uncontested? She was a bloody Remainer. Okay, so why on earth would they put up a Remainer after the country, largely the Tories, have just campaigned successfully to remain, to exit? Okay, so they put up Theresa May, who's probably not a bad person, but boy, oh boy, she had a miserable time as Prime Minister, and Brexit just became this bog. And it just got worse and worse and worse. And then she had an election, and Jeremy Corbyn, reduced it to a hung parliament. Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much, because there was no enthusiasm for her on her own side because she was a Remainer, which the dumb party room, how could you do that? Now, so then finally, in the depths of the Brexit hells, Theresa says, oh, maybe I should resign. So she resigns. We have a leadership contest, which we should have had in 2016, but we had a leadership contest in 2016 by Boris Johnson, who was at Brexiteer and had been during the campaign, and somebody who was pro-Remain, and the Brexiteer wins, 70% to 30%. So we had an endorsement from his party. Then he goes and gets Brexit done. Now, the membership was right and the party room was wrong. Okay. Now, another example is John Howard contested the leadership, or almost contested the leadership, on about 7 occasions between 1983 and 1996. And almost on every occasion, John Howard lost badly. Okay, Andrew Peacock would smash him. John Hewson smashed him twice, or once, but Howard pulled out another time because he was going to get smashed. And he pulled out against Alexander Downer because he was going to get smashed. So the party room consistently got John Howard wrong. He got the leadership twice by default. and he never really won a ballot. And so, but then John Howard goes on to become the second most successful Prime Minister in Australian history. So the party room got that right. If the membership had been invited in the 1980s to vote between Andrew Peacock and John Howard, they would have voted 70% for John Howard. And because the party room gets it wrong, because let's say you got a party room of 80 people, 1/3 of them at least, Tim, after that ballot, are going to be a front bencher. And every politician is an egomaniac. And so they all want to get promoted. So they might think that candidate A is the better person for the country and more likely to win a federal election. But candidate B is to promise them the shadow defence minister. So they're going to vote for candidate B. But the membership, you can't bribe 100,000, 200,000 members of the party. You just can't bribe them. They're going to vote on merit. Are they going to vote for a more conservative candidate? Yes. In most cases, yes, they will. Times change and moods change. But yes, they would vote for a more conservative candidate. But it would be it would be somebody, let's say, for example, like Tony Abbott was a conservative. But when Tony Abbott didn't win it with the endorsement of the membership, but just with the party room, even though Tony Abbott is a sincere conservative and a highly intelligent conservative, he sort of had to campaign as though he's wishy-washy, as though he's sort of a centrist. He said, I'm not going to cut back spending on health and ABC and SBS and everything else. If he had first had to have won the leadership by campaigning to the politically interested Liberal Party supporters, the people who've gone out of their way to join the party, and a lot of them will only join the party because they do get a vote for the membership, and that's who we want more than anyone, because they're not people who are joining the party because they want something for themselves. We want people having a say who join the Liberal Party because they want something for their country. And these people are nothing in it for them. They'll vote on merit. So we'll have a conservative, but with a conservative mandate. And I believe that person can convince a majority of Australians to vote for them.
And the democratic reform proposal in the New South Wales Liberal Party was named after Tony Abbott's electorate. It was called the Warringah motion.
Yes. Well, what had happened is, after many ups and downs and battles, a political party's constitution, Tim, should be 10 to 20 pages. A political party, look, a company needs a constitution. A little Boy Scouts Association needs a constitution to set the internal organisational rules. So a political party needs a constitution. You can type into Google, Illinois Democratic Party Constitution or South Carolina Republican Party Constitution. They're all available on the internet. They're 10 to 20 pages long. The New South Wales Liberal Party Constitution it was, before we started amending it, was 220 pages. It was a document that actually had its origins in the 1880s, when the first sort of organised conservative political parties were put together. And that document had just passed through the decades. Everyone thinks the Liberal Party started in 1944. It started in the 1880s, and it just had about 6 name changes. That's the truth. Robert Menzies did not start a new party. He got the United Australia Party and he rebadged it, and he made a few other little cosmetic changes. That is the truth. So that constitution of the New South Wales Liberal Party is this ancient document that was 220 pages. It was so Byzantine and opaque that the factional rats were the only ones that knew their way through it. So what we had to do is, what the Warringah electorate did was, they went through the very hard task of rewriting that document and making it and putting in the reforms that we were proposing. And yes, it helped that, and that was very good of Tony Abbott to let his electorate propose that while he was the Prime Minister. So that's how it got the name of the Warringah Constitution.
Let's now inject how Trump ascended to the presidency over in the United States, because a person like him to become the leader of Australia would have to get pre-selection in the Liberal Party, then win a party room ballot. While obviously we're a parliamentary system here in Australia. Over in the US, they have the presidential direct separation of powers. Trump in the Republican primaries knocked out the 15 other establishment candidates to win the nomination. And even though the party establishment didn't want him. They knew they couldn't rob him of the nomination at the convention, and then he was able to go on to win the Electoral College in 2016. But it just shows to go to you that the fact that even though he was described all along, Donald Trump, as unelectable, the Republican Party is going to be doomed if they nominate him, he won in 2016.
Yes, and that story, and look, we also need to say that Donald Trump was a magnificent president, because I grew up, and I want to get back to your question about the election of the leader, but that plain citizen, Trump was the first plain citizen out of the 44 presidents preceding him. They were all former politicians, or in a couple of occasions, generals, which is very political anyway, like generals that won World War II and, and the Civil War, things like that, the Revolutionary War. So Trump was this plain citizen who walked off the street and won, to everyone's shock, and was a magnificent president, because I grew up with a left that said that the two things that they care about the most were world peace and helping the poor. Well, I'm sorry, Donald Trump gets a 10 out of 10 on both, okay, in terms of lifting up things. So what I'm saying is we should have a system that is open to a plain citizen coming in and being the national leader. Now, obviously, it's not going to happen every time. It might only happen once a generation, but it is healthy. It is democratic to have it at least as a possibility that some figure can just be a very successful person in the non-political arena. Now, a lot of the time that's going to be in the business world, but it doesn't have to be. It could be anything. Now, in the 1980s, we remember Reagan and Thatcher. There was another great leader who we often don't remember, the Canadian Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, who was very much part of the, when Reagan died, two foreigners were asked to speak at his funeral. One was Thatcher and one was Brian Mulroney. Brian Mulroney was a successful businessman. He won the party. He was never a politician. He won the convention, because the Canadians have been electing, the membership of the Canadian political parties have been electing their parliamentary leader since the 1930s. And there's no two countries on earth more similar than Australia and Canada. If you go back to the 1890s in this country, when we were drafting our constitution, people think that we copied Westminster and we copied Washington. The truth is we looked at Canada more than anybody else, because it's the same thing. Okay, a big confederation with a monarchy and a bicameral parliament. So the Brian Mulroney was very good, okay, and very successful. So we want a system where a plain citizen, and I think you've read parts of the book, Tim, where a plain citizen, you don't need to be a parliamentary leader to win the convention, to be a parliamentarian, because that's the rule in Canada. You can win the convention, the leadership convention, and become the parliamentary leader and not be a member of parliament. So people say, well, how's that work? Well, the convention is that if somebody is elected, and it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. But if somebody wins the parliamentary leadership and they're not a member of parliament, somebody in the parliament in a safe seat steps aside. They might be old, and if they have to be told, hey, look, you can be the ambassador to Japan or you can be the ambassador to Italy, the other side doesn't make it a political thing, because they just got to get this guy in there. And the other side, there's a by-election, but the other side doesn't contest the by-election, so they just walk into parliament. Now, that's what we would like to have, rather than having, why is it in this great country of 25 million people, with so many impressive people in so many different fields, world impressive, are we limited to such a small pool of who could be our national leader?
Yeah, and as I described to you, it's and as well as I do, you've got to win the pre-selection, which is a grueling, bruising process. We just talked about Jim Molan's experience, that it takes a lot of energy, which a lot of people who are successful in other fields just can't be bothered.
Well, look, the thing is, under the current system, if you happen to be a really impressive person, you decided you wanted to be the Prime Minister, yes, well, it's a very greasy pole you've got to get your way up. Yes, the local pre-selection is always very, very messy. And then you've got to win the election, and then you get to Parliament and you're just a backbencher. Okay, well then you've got to move up. You've got to become a outside front bencher. Then you've got to move into the senior ministry, then into the cabinet. Okay, it's just one big sort of brown nosing your way to the top. Well, under the democratic ideal, if we think of Athens and Rome, under the democratic ideal, we would have an impressive person who then puts themselves forward and said, I think actually I could be a very good leader. And now most of the time they're going to crash and burn, but that doesn't matter. Having the option there keeps the place more democratic, because at the moment we have a closed avenue to the leadership.
Now let's go back to Donald Trump. He's no longer US president. We're on YouTube at the moment, so we can't talk about election irregularities, but we can say that there was a concerted 4-year campaign by the mainstream media, the social media through their censorship, and the injection of money from all the new reborn woke corporations to get rid of Trump. And they didn't care who the other guy was. It ended up being Sleepy Joe Biden, the oldest president ever inaugurated, and they eventually got their man out, like they did with Nixon in the 70s. And well, the Biden presidency so far has been pretty, you would say, mediocre. He's just signed a bunch of executive orders. He's just done one good thing, Biden, ending the US support for the Saudis in Yemen. That's an excellent, probably his best, I would say, executive action so far. But not much else has happened. The Democrat Congress and the House, they're obsessed with Marjorie Taylor Greene, the new Republican congresswoman. She's the new Trump that they're wanting to demonize. And then the Senate, which the Democrats have, well, they're in the majority thanks to Kamala Harris being the tiebreaker vote, but they're getting ready for the Trump impeachment trial. So they're still chasing boogeymen, it seems, the left.
Well, look, they're going to, they can't stop talking about Trump. Okay, they are addicted to Trump. Okay, now during the election last year, it was hard not to watch a lot of American cable TV. I would have watched 50% of the time. I would have watched CNN. And 50%.
Yeah, I did as well.
Yes. Okay, because I want to know what the other side is saying. I know what my side is saying, and I was, it's appalling coverage. But since the election, it's been too hard to stomach to watch them. But I do flick over for about 20 seconds, maybe 2 or 3 times a day. And 2 out of 3 times, Tim, what are they talking about? They're not talking about the new president. They're talking about the old president. They're hooked on him. Okay, and they just want to keep building. It's like in the book 1984 by George Orwell. There was like this bogeyman. I think his name is. And look, he was probably even a fictitious figure.
Oh, I know who you're talking about, and I've forgotten as well.
Yes. But he's like the ever-present bogeyman, and he's like, everything bad that ever happens is because of him, and you've got to focus all your energy on him because just think about him. Okay, and that is what they are doing now, because obviously Mr. Biden's not a very impressive person, but the Biden administration reminds me of like a duck that's swimming along on the pond. And it looks like it's just going along very gracefully. But in fact, there is actually an enormous amount of energy going on beneath the surface that we're not seeing. So Biden just looks like he's going out there doing a few, executive orders, and he's, just cruising along. But I can promise you, Tim, behind the scenes, the secretaries, the assistant secretaries, the undersecretaries, the people that we've never heard of, the people who've now got executive power, they are doing things. They are re-engineering the bureaucracy so that they can bring about them. And they love these mail-in ballots, and they love all these rules that they've changed at the last moment. They're going to try and lock these things in, and so they used to think that the populist movement, which they started with the Tea Party in 2010. They thought it was just a little faction of the Republican Party. It then basically morphed into the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency, and they know that that even if Biden has got more votes than Trump, Trump's still got an enormous amount of votes. So they're thinking they see him as this existential threat, and they particularly hated him because he was going to drain the swamp, but they hated him because he was so successful. He was so successful in taming North Korea. Now, I know North Korea hasn't changed, and the North Korean people are suffering, okay? But the chances of there being a nuclear conflict, a nuclear bomb dropping on Tokyo or Seoul now, is like dropped by 90%. And that used to be something that we were always concerned about. Why did that happen? It happened because of Donald Trump. And when Donald Trump's with that little jerk in North Korea, that guy that we've all been so frightened of, that we thought was such a tough, evil dictator.
I wasn't frightened of him.
Well, when you see him around Trump, and they've been in each other's presence a few times, he's like in awe of this big movie star. He's like this little jerk. Okay, so success, unorthodox what he did in North Korea, but successful. Now, in the Middle East, ever since I was a kid, way before I was a kid, my grandfather's time, there's been conflict, dreadful, terrible conflict, ancient conflict in the Middle East, okay, the Arab-Israeli conflict. And every president's tried to do something, because this would be the thing that would put them up in history. Clinton tried, Bush tried, Obama tried, they all failed. And then Trump comes along with all his bravado, and he says during the primary, and he says early on in his administration, if I'm going to fix up the Arab-Israeli conflict. I'm the best deal maker there is. I'm going to fix it up. I thought, okay, good on you, Donald. You try, mate. But I just thought it won't go anywhere. Now, then about 2 years ago, the big announcement is he's going to send over his zero foreign policy credentialed son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who happens to be Jewish. And I thought, okay, Jared, all the best. Hope it works out. Not expecting any results. And what have we got? We've got half a dozen peace agreements, bilateral peace agreements between Arab states and Israel. It's extraordinary. And two of those, the Gulf states, the UAE and one of the other ones, the little ones, they are basically vassal states of Saudi Arabia. This was those guys, the UAE and the other one, Qatar or Bahrain, they don't do anything without Saudi Arabia. They're all intermarried, the royal families and everything, of course. So that was the beginning of Saudi Arabia itself, the home of Mecca and Medina, the homeland of Muhammad, saying, hey, we want to patch things up with Israel. We want to have a permanent peace here. Now, we know that the Saudis are motivated not by a love of peace and goodwill and their Israeli cousins, but we know it's fear of Iran. We know that, and they see that, obviously the Saudis have taken the calculation that American administrations come and go, and sometimes it waxes and wanes how much they like us. But we've got this military over here in our neighborhood that's super duper powerful. It's called the Israeli military, and they don't like our enemy. And, why don't we just become buddies with them? So, of course, it's all self-interest, but thank God it's happening. Now, it really under Trump, you mentioned the Yemen situation, which, of course, is heartbreaking, but the Middle East is looking pretty good right now. I'm not saying there's going to be an outbreak of liberal democracy, but as long as we can just have no war for a period, the Arabs have always been, back into antiquity, magnificent merchants and businessmen and builders. So if they can have peace for a couple of decades, they'll build the place into, hopefully something that can evolve into a fairly liberal and a fairly democratic part of the world. So I thank Trump for that.
He started no wars during his presidency, which is he's the first one in a long time to achieve that. Almost, tried to end one in Afghanistan, which is turning into America's longest conflict. Emmanuel Goldstein was the villain, boogeyman that we were talking about in 1984. I mentioned before Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, since Twitter kicked Trump off, they can't rage about his tweets. Trump, he's choosing to stay silent at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. They also took away Parler as well post the Capitol Hill storming on January 6th. But the events of January 6th, they did hope both the media and the far left and the establishment Republicans that this would be the end of Trumpism and the MAGA movement. And obviously they've seen Marjorie Taylor Greene, freshman congresswoman from Georgia, won the series of primaries there to get in Congress. I'm not sure what your view is on her, but a lot of what you read about her is fake news. She doesn't believe in, what's it, Jewish space lasers. She doesn't believe in that. But after the events of January 6th, the Republican base, they've communicated to most of the congressional Republicans that we still support MAGA, we still like Trump. And so we're seeing MAGA congressmen like Matt Gaetz, they're still making their voices heard. And the establishment Republicans such as Liz Cheney, who voted to impeach Trump again, it's not so easy to just ignore the 74 million who voted for Trump.
Well, that's very true. We've got to focus on how do we win in 2024. Now, I don't believe Trump is the person to do that.
And me either.
Yeah. Now, there would be a very sort of convoluted web of events where it could happen. Okay, but and I think actually Trump, I know he won't do this, but he should say, I won't be a candidate for 2024, because until he does say that, he's going to suck all the oxygen out of the room so that another candidate can't sort of flower. Okay, so, but look, on Marjorie Greene, I'd never heard of it before about 3 days ago. I saw her speech in the Congress yesterday. She says that I think she's basically admitting that she did at some point believe in 9/11 truth conspiracies, but she doesn't anymore. She did believe in QAnon, but she doesn't anymore. And she did believe in unusual things about the Sandy Hook situation. Okay. Now, she has said in the Congress yesterday that she doesn't believe in all those things, and she spoke against them. Okay. Well, my problem with her is this. While she might be a very nice person and a very sincere person, I don't want somebody in Congress who is capable of believing those things at any period in their life. Okay, so, but I'm not particularly overly focused about her because I bet she's basically a good citizen. For every one Marjorie Greene Taylor that we have, and I think she's learned her lesson and she's probably not stupid anymore, but I'd still prefer her not to be there because I think she at least was stupid. And, stupid can be hard to get rid of. But the Democrats have got people that are like worse on their fringe, and their fringe is radical and dangerous, okay? And there's like endless people in that category. So this is just more bullying. This is persecuting the heretic. The Democrats love what happened on the 6th of January. Because they're trying to exploit it for all that they can. When it was not a coup, it was a disorganized rabble and a mob. And yes, they need to be prosecuted. But Trump made a big mistake. I'm sorry, look, he didn't incite the violence. His words are very clear. We're going to go over there peacefully and peacefully. Very clear that he said peacefully. But the question has to be asked, why the hell have a show of force on the day of the Electoral College? Okay, that's not what we want. That's not within the realms of constitutional norms. Okay, and I'm sorry, I supported the challenges, the legal challenges, but when the Supreme Court said we're not interested in pursuing this, now two justices said they are, two of the best justices, and one abstained, so it wasn't a unanimous thing. But rightly or wrongly in my view, the Supreme Court said, we're not going to look into this fraud investigation. We're not going to take it up. That was the end of the story. That in our system, the monarch, the crown, intervenes in politics about once a century, which is why the system works. But when they do intervene, that's it. It's final because the crown has spoken. Well, in the US, the equivalent is the Supreme Court, if they say they're not going to investigate presidential election fraud, that's it. And Trump should have. That was early December. Trump actually did give a very good, gracious speech to Biden at Andrews Air Force Base after Biden, just as he was getting inaugurated. Trump gave a very nice speech. He should have given that speech after the Supreme Court. Then he would have been well placed to win in 2024. But unfortunately, after all the harassment, the extreme harassment that candidate Trump and President Trump faced, or the extremely unfair harassment, and despite that still being a good president, what's happened at the end is he's blown a gasket. His supporters have blown a gasket, a very small number of them, and it's been very unfortunate. But the grand old party will live on. I mean, we only, on paper, we only lost by about 3%. So it wasn't like a Barry Goldwater style wipeout.
I agree with you that when the Supreme Court made their ruling that Biden was going to become president, and what you're referring to on what Trump was trying to do on January 6th was get Vice President Mike Pence to throw out all the Electoral College votes, which would have been entirely unprecedented. And you would have seen Antifa and all the other Democrat-aligned groups probably riot if that had happened as well. But in terms of what Trump said to the January 6th rally and also Rudy Giuliani, they still couldn't have predicted what would happen. And warlike language in politically rhetoric, so we're going to fight, it's just rhetoric. Nobody expects that people are going to take it literally, and people don't take it literally. People are going to commit acts of political violence. They're going to do it anyway.
Well, look. As we know, the America was racked last year by left-wing political violence, unending left-wing political violence. In the Capitol building, I think in at least one state, in Oregon maybe, but the right, there was no violence at MAGA rallies, and except that it has been exposed since in 2016 at MAGA rallies when Trump was a candidate. There would be scuffles in the audience, and it turned out that the Project Veritas, which I'm sure you're familiar with, has since exposed this was people paid by the Democratic Party, like they were paying hobos like $100 to go to a MAGA rally and to just start wildly throwing around punches so it could get on the news. There's violence at the MAGA rallies. That's how non-violent the Republican Party people are. But then, of course, this was Trump shouldn't have contested it past the Supreme Court. He shouldn't have had the rally. Look, I'm very proud to say Donald Trump did retweet me once, and Donald Trump Jr. retweeted me once. So I feel like, if I send out a tweet to Trump, what are the chances he's going to read it? I'd say about 1 in 1,000, but it's not nil. About 3 days before the rally, the January the 6th rally, I pleaded with him. I said, "Dear President Trump, I believe you were robbed a million ways, but Sleepy is going to be inaugurated. Don't listen to people telling you to do this." And I would point into some tweet where someone's saying, "Let's go crazy in Washington." I said, "Don't listen to this. These people are your enemies." Okay, but anyway, so look, what it's done is it's drawn a line under the Trump era, and we have to think of who's going to be able to win. We can't have these radical Democrats in there for 2 terms. They need to find someone, Tim, and this is the hard question. They need to find somebody that the MAGA people are going to be enthusiastic about, and that the establishment is going to be enthusiastic about. Now, if we need both wings to win. Trump pulled off the miracle in 2016 when the establishment was not on his side, and he won. Okay, that's a freaky result. Like that's going to happen once a century when an extraordinary character comes along like Donald Trump. But barring someone in Trump's league, we need the establishment, who I know that we're all peed off with right now because they were basically, not very pro-Trump when it mattered. But we need those boys back on side. I'm not talking about the Lincoln Group. Anyone associated with the Lincoln Group is a write-off. But we need to get, the Senate Republicans and so forth back on side.
Well, I've already been open that I'm supporting Ron DeSantis to run for the Republican nomination in 2024, the governor of Florida, who, after initially going for some modest coronavirus restrictions when it hit the West in March 2020, it came to the conclusion in September that, look, enough is enough. This virus has a 99% recovery rate. We're going to open, and if people get sick, we can manage. Our hospitals can manage. We can take care of them. And if you look at Florida, which is open, versus the lockdown state California, California is doing worse. I mean, there's still like lots of coronavirus cases in Florida, but it doesn't fit the narrative that there's going to be mass deaths. The bodies are going to pile up if you don't lock down. Florida has it is not doing any worse than the lockdown states. And Ron DeSantis, he keeps saying that everyone here is an essential worker. We want our citizens and our businesses to get on with their lives.
Look, Ron DeSantis, he won a tough race for governor a few years ago. And another important sign that someone is gearing up for a presidential run, Tim, is often if they lose weight. And Ron DeSantis has lost a fair bit of weight from what I can see lately. He would be... Look, governors have a pretty good track record in becoming president. I like the idea of another non-politician. The figure I've got in mind is Sean Hannity, because the MAGA people like him, and the establishment has been lining up to be on his TV and radio show for the last 25 years. He's very likable. He's pretty much got the same agenda as Trump, though he's more pro-free market, which is good. I can see you've got the Austrian economics in your background there, Tim. That was the one disappointment about Trump. Didn't really matter that much because he cut taxes so much. He didn't seem to understand free trade. I like Sean because he's, as we were saying, he's a non-politician, and look, people do like Sean Hannity. Even lefties sort of do like him. So.
Well, there's also, speaking of Fox News host, Tucker Carlson is also widely admired by the MAGA crowd as well. He's probably been he's even more outspoken on issues than Sean Hannity.
Well, look, Sean sort of took the view from the very beginning that the whole media is going to be so nasty and unfair to Trump at every second. And I feel as though Sean and Rush Limbaugh took the view, look, he's got to have someone in his corner, at all times, because normally a president's got 70% of the press in their corner. This guy's got the whole press against him. So Sean just took the view, I will be, every day, no matter what happens, I'm going to back this guy, and good on him. Okay. Tucker did sort of go against Trump a few times, but you're right.
On principle.
Yeah, absolutely on principle. And, Tucker was probably right on those occasions. And look, I'm a Tucker fan, and Tucker's show generally has got a few more viewers than Sean. Tucker worries me on the free trade issue and a few other economic issues. So whereas Sean, I'm more comfortable with. But look, we're probably speculating. It'll probably be, Tim. We'll probably just go back to the standard lineup. Trump was probably an aberration. We're probably going to go back to the Nikki Haley's, the Rubios and the Ted Cruz's. That's probably. But let's hope we can keep it going with Trump.
Now let's pivot back to Australia, because there's a lot of speculation that there could be a federal election by year's end. It's going to be mid-2022 by the latest. A news poll came out at the beginning of last week, which showed 50-50 two-party preferred, but news poll was wrong last time by 3 points, which consistently showed that Bill Shorten was going to become Prime Minister. That didn't happen. But Scott Morrison, most people think that he'll have the benefit of the incumbency because of the pandemic, though there is still a very hostile media against him, and they're particularly... we've seen this past week, they've ferociously attacked Craig Kelly, Liberal backbencher for Hughes, demanding that Scott Morrison slap him down, gag him. And again, they've twisted what Craig Kelly has been posting on Facebook. He's simply been talking about peer-reviewed studies about hydroxychloroquine and Invermec to treat coronavirus, and rightly been advocating, along with George Christensen, who's a national in Queensland, that the vaccines need to be voluntary. They need to be scrutinised by our TGA, which is happening as well. But it shows that Morrison and the coalition are going to be up against the mainstream media whenever the election is.
Well, look, I have a feeling Morrison, who is not an ideologue, Morrison is very much a politician who just really is focused on just winning an election and just, keeping the polls on side. He has a thin majority in the House and he doesn't quite have a majority in the Senate. So he must be thinking, let's go early. Labor's got troubles. These news polls showing it's 50-50, that is a magnificent position for an incumbent government to be midway through a parliamentary term, because governments win about 3 out of 4 elections in this country, maybe even more. And when an opposition does occasionally beat an incumbent government, the polls midway through the final term show the government losing 42 to 58. I mean, that before Tony Abbott beat Rudd, that's what polls have been like that for a long time. Before Rudd beat Howard in 2007, the polls were exactly the same: 40 to 42 for the Liberal Party, 58 to 60 for Rudd. And same thing happened in with Howard against Keating. Maybe not as bad then, but my point is, when governments win elections, but when they do occasionally lose, the bond with the people is, the people aren't just cranky, it's like they've really switched off and there's a big gap. Now, even when they lose, that gap narrows. So when Abbott beat Rudd, it was like 53-47. But when you're midway through the term, if you're 50-50 and you're the government, basically, congratulations, you've won your 4th term Liberal Party. That's how I see it. Now, I'm not particularly thrilled about that, okay, because it's a pretty useless right of centre government, okay, but, the choice is the Labor Party. Now, the Labor Party at the last election was the worst of the Labor Party. Shorten, who was meant to be the next Bob Hawke, who was meant to be the right-wing trade union guy who was friendly with big business, for some reason along the line, I think he just got sucked into all the anti-Trump extremism, and he just thought, oh, everybody I know is like extremely woke because they hate Trump so much. So that's what Middle Australia wants. When they came out with their policy platform at the last election, someone did a word search on the word gender, okay, and it was just like appeared like about 163 times in their policy document. That was all their focus, all this new stuff that I don't think is particularly popular in Middle Australia. So, look, I think that Morrison will probably go, after the vaccines, he'll try and get it launched successfully in his. I don't even think we need a vaccine, but if people want to take it, go for it. But I suspect it'll be. Look, they usually don't have federal elections in the middle of winter. So we're probably not going to have an election in June, July, August. So we may have one in May, or we may have one in spring. I'd be pretty sure Morrison would do that.
And you also have to remember how good Morrison campaigned during the 2019 election, and the Liberal Party director, Andrew Hurst, ran an excellent, particularly social media campaign as well to pull off that victory. So there is also the campaign itself, which his nickname is always Scotty from marketing, but hey, marketing helps you win an election.
Well, of course you're right. Look, it was an extraordinary result, and it was because of Morrison. Okay, you'd see Shorten on when the federal election is on. I always go out of my way to watch the Channel 9 News political coverage and the Channel 7 News political coverage. I mean, I usually watch the ABC political coverage at most nights, and I usually watch a lot of Sky. But when it's the federal election, I want to know what the punters in the marginal seats are watching. Now, what I would see on 7 and 9 in the federal election, I would see Bill Shorten in his, double-breasted suit, looking very serious, with 20 other people with double-breasted suits reading out some, big super-duper new policy deal, some big new it's electric cars today, it's some big new thing tomorrow. And then they'd go to the, they give equal coverage to the two parliamentary leaders. And then there'd be ScoMo, up there at the Rockhampton RSL. G'day, ScoMo, would be the guy with the fluoro, construction guy's shirt on. And g'day, mate, come and have a beer, mate. How you going, mate? And then you might see ScoMo have a little, someone might have a dig at him about the Sharks because they like the North Queensland Tigers, Cowboys, right? Okay, so that was ScoMo. So people saw Shorten over here, looking like Mr. Technocrat, Mr. Serious, and here's Mr. ScoMo, Now, Tim, yes, you're entirely correct. That was good politics, okay? But it was, he won the election. Look, I was thrilled he won the election. Okay, look, I've got a little mortgage broking business, which Bill Shorten wanted to shut down. So I was happy that Scott Morrison won, okay, for that and many other reasons. Okay, but I mean, it was an inglorious victory, okay, because he had no agenda. He came out with yet another stupid first home buyer policy a week before the election, and he just campaigned on sort of being a daggy dad. Okay, well, it worked. Well, I would prefer that a great nation like Australia, with a hell of a lot of challenges in the 21st century, domestic and international, I would sort of prefer to have sort of, higher quality leadership that's going to sort of steer the nation in the right direction. We ain't going to get that through ScoMo.
Now let's. I mentioned Craig Kelly, the week that he's had. There's a lot of media commentary about whether he'll get re-endorsed as the Liberal member for Hughes. The media line is that Craig Kelly is Scott Morrison's captain's pick because he made sure that the New South Wales Liberal State Executive re-endorsed Craig Kelly at the 2019 federal election. Do you think that if there was a primary in the seat of Hughes, which is in southwestern Sydney, Craig Kelly would win?
Well, that is a very interesting question, actually. That is, if it was a primary. Well, typically in the US, and we've had a couple of primaries in New South Wales with the Nationals and even the Labor Party have had a few trial primaries, typically 10% of the electorate turns up. Okay, so I think given Craig Kelly's high profile, well, what had happened actually in that situation? Okay, in the US, Tim, the primaries work because the Democrats and the Republicans have the primary on the same day. Okay, so you can't, let's say you're a hardcore right-wing Republican, you can't go and vote in the Democratic primary to go and vote for a crazy lefty so that they get a bad candidate. But what would happen if we had a primary in Hughes and it was an open primary? Well, then a lot of lefties would go and vote against him. Okay, so if we're going to have primaries, we have to have Labor and Liberal primaries on the same day. But if that was the case, if there was a Labor and Liberal primary on the same day in Hughes, so you'd be having the hardcore people vote and they would be voting for Craig Kelly. But look, I think I would be surprised if Craig Kelly wins his pre-selection, okay? Because, yes, the last two times, look, who are these people in the Liberal Party trying to get rid of Craig Kelly? Idiots, okay? These are people who are just stacking in unimpressive people who aren't even interested in politics. It's just a pure brand stack, and they're not interested in politics, and they just want to put in one of their mates who's going to make no impact in Canberra. I think the guy they've got in mind used to be heavily involved in the ALP. He just sort of changed parties. It wasn't because of ideological considerations, I can promise you that, because he's the type of guy I don't think he reads a lot of books. So they're going to, so it'll just be an ugly brand stack. But, last time ScoMo and the time before that, Turnbull, facing a tough election, they didn't want to upset the wider Conservative base. So they said, okay, it was a captain's pick. But now that Craig Kelly is, got lots of enemies in the media, good enemies to have in my view, the Prime Minister will not be inclined to save him this time. So therefore, what does Craig Kelly do? Well, option one is that he retires from public life. Well, he's got more followers on Facebook, I understand. I'm not much of a Facebooker, but I understand he's got more followers than Scott Morrison. I think he certainly did at one point.
Oh, and his analytics as well are the highest of any politician.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Okay, so is he going to retire and we don't hear from him again? Maybe. I don't think so. Is he going to contest Hughes as a independent? I hope not, because I don't think he'd win. Okay, because it's independents do not have a track record at all in anywhere near Hughes. Okay, in the really wealthy suburbs, independents have got a better track record, and that's going back a fair while now. Look, of course, I hope he's the Liberal candidate for Hughes. Okay, but if that doesn't happen, I hope he considers being the One Nation candidate for New South Wales for the Senate, because he needs 14% of the vote, and Pauline can pull 14% in Queensland. One Nation has never pulled 14% in New South Wales. They did have a One Nation senator, but that was in the double dissolution election when you need 7%.
Well, Mark Latham is the state leader now. He's got a significant high profile. The political marriage between Pauline Hanson and Mark Latham has worked. So One Nation in New South Wales has a strong presence with Mark Latham as the leader.
Absolutely. He should. Mark Latham. Look, I have always liked Pauline. By pure chance, I was a very junior staffer in Canberra in 1996. I was walking past the chamber and I heard the speaker say, "I now call the member for Oxley," and I remind the House it's her maiden speech. And I remember thinking, "Oh, that's Pauline Hanson." And I sat immediately above her in the public gallery to a very empty parliament, but that was the speech that shocked the nation. And, look, she was talking about taking a hard line against illegal immigration a lot longer than John Howard was before Tampa. And she was, so she has been right on some things. And Mark, the former leader of the Australian Labor Party, federal leader, the guy that got, 48% of the country to vote for him to be the Prime Minister, yes, he brings a new level of credibility to the organisation. And I think that Craig Kelly would get 14% because he's not going to get any preferences from the Libs. They'll preference Labor ahead of him. And I think, and that would be good. That would be good if he was if he continued to be in the Parliament. Well,
I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you today, John. You've got as you've put it all in a book, a clear manifesto about what needs to change in the Australian Liberal Party to make it great again. And, well, we've done our best to, you would say, predict, analyse and speculate what the rest of the year is going to hold. And, well, over in the US, the midterms in 2022 and presidential election in 2024. But politics is always unpredictable. So who knows what's going to happen in 1 month, let alone 6 months.
Yes. Okay, Tim, look, thank you very much, mate. I've enjoyed listening to the show and I've enjoyed participating in it. So maybe we can do it again in the lead up to the midterms or something.
Yep, certainly. There'll still be a lot to discuss, and in the meantime, I'll still be able to hear your opinions on Sky regularly as well. So I always tune into those as well.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you very much, Tim. It was a great honour.
This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net.
So I hope you enjoyed that discussion between myself and John. As you can see, he's extremely knowledgeable on Australian political history and also political theory as well. I would recommend his book if you want a crash course on democracy in terms of political parties as well. And another guest that I've had on the show in 2020, Professor David Flint, who wrote the book Give Us Back Our Country. He makes a case for direct democracy as a whole in our system of government as well. But that's a whole other different topic there. So I briefly summarized the news of the week at the beginning of the show. I touched upon the Australian government's coronavirus vaccine rollout to begin in the next month. Our Therapeutic Goods Administration, which approves drugs in Australia, has approved the Pfizer BioNTech mRNA vaccine, which, based on the evidence I've seen, is the most problematic of the vaccines when it comes to side effects. Our TGA is yet to approve the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the most promising in terms of preventing transmission of the virus and which there is an ample local supply of. The CSL Pharmaceuticals plant in Melbourne has already been manufacturing millions and millions of doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, though it's going to be the foreign US big pharma Pfizer vaccine that's going to be out at the end of February, and the state governments, as has been so the case with this pandemic response, are going to be having their own vaccination rollout programs. Also hitting the news today is there is a proposal of a federal government vaccine certificate or passport, which can be stored on your phone in the Medicare Express Plus app or the MyGov app. And there is also talk of the state premiers setting their own digital vaccination records, certificates, and syncing it with their QR code check-in systems that they have for contact tracing. So a lot of privacy and Big Brother implications of that to discuss and debate on the upcoming Unshackled productions this week. Of course, tomorrow night, Monday, 8:30 p.m. Victorian time on the Unshackled YouTube channel. It's The Brawler and the Brain, hosted by myself and Jared Seaby, MMA fighter and gym operator up in the Victorian New South Wales borderlands. And then Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Melbourne time on the Unshackled's YouTube channel, Trad Tasman Talk, hosted by myself and Dewey de Boer. The next edition of WilmsFront is on Wednesday on the WilmsFront channels, 8:30 p.m. Victorian time. My guest will be economist John Adams to talk about the volatility of the markets in early 2021, the GameStop mania and what's been happening in the silver market, and he's also keeping a keen eye on what's happening over in the US as well. Then Thursday, of course, I'm a regular panelist on the Dusty Bogans Thirsty Thursday, which is also simulcast on the Unshackled YouTube channel, which is at 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time, which is 7:30 Brisbane time, which is where Dusty is based. And then there'll be another Sunday special of WilmsFront next Sunday night, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the WilmsFront YouTube and D Live, returning after starting his own media venture with the ARC podcast. Joel Jamal, he'll be returning to WilmsFront to discuss his recent success with the ARC, which is hosted by Joel and Ricardo Bossi, the founder and leader of the Australia One Party. Joel he's done so well with his show and the highlights clips that have gone viral on Facebook that Facebook has took down his profile for about a week, but he's back now. But there's a whole lot of shenanigans there. So clearly he's worrying a few people here. He and Ricardo's show. So I'll be sure to see what's going on there, and also what else is he's got planned for 2021. So that's the Unshackled productions coming up this next week. Thank you everyone for watching tonight on this Sunday special. It will become, as I said on Wednesday, a semi-regular occurrence. So make sure follow me on Telegram, Gab, MeWe, Minds. That's where I post the show updates, and also make sure on the YouTube, whether it be WilmsFront or the Unshackled YouTube channels, click the bell to allow notifications. Also being released regularly on the Unshackled YouTube channel, regular reports from Tiger Mountain hosted by Richard Borston-Croft. And then, of course, our regular commentary on the Unshackled.net as well. So thank you so much for watching tonight. I'll see you tomorrow night for The Brawler and the Brain. And have a good week. And hopefully, if there's any more cases, we can, as the Victorian government has adopted as its slogan, that's not an endorsement of the Victorian government, obviously, that we can still stay safe and stay open as well, because I think with the Brisbane and Perth snap lockdowns, not not proving to be needed when it comes to suppressing the virus, given how we're going here in Melbourne without a snap lockdown. I think it's proved that we no longer need these snap lockdowns. So I hope everyone in Australia this week stays free and stays open, and I'll see you all again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.